It was January 17th, 1952. The snowfall had not stopped for 3 days. By morning, the convent was gone. Every nun, every icon, every door and wall. What remained were 37 sets of footprints, leading away from the hilltop chapel and into the woods, where they simply stopped. The trees are dark, stripped, their branches clawing at a pale sky. A road winds through the white hills, cutting toward a rise where a single structure waits it is a convent's stone walls. Built nearly a century ago, a central chapel crowned, with a narrow belfry, 37 windows, one for each sister who called it home. The bells above were small. They only tolled on Sundays. The sound was faint, carried by the wind, sometimes mistaken for the shifting of ice on the river below. Most days they were silent, and that silence was what most remembered from the valley below. The convent was little more than a silhouette, a square of gray stone and black slate, perched on its hill like a watchtower. The road leading up was rarely traveled. Only a handful of villagers ever went there, and when they did, they kept their visits brief. The sisters who lived there were known, but not known. They wore heavy woolen habits when they walked outside. Their faces stayed low, veiled against the wind. They never visited the village, and they only accepted visitors. Through a narrow iron gate, speaking softly, hands folded, never stepping beyond the threshold, was said they belonged to an old order, one not recognized by the local diocese. Their name, if they had one, was rarely spoken. The villagers simply called them the sisters on the hill. Most people, in truth, were content to leave them alone. They prayed, they farmed their small patch of land, they rang their bells on Sunday morning, and by Monday, the hill was still again. But not everyone found the stillness comforting in winter. The wind carried strange sounds down the slope. Long after midnight, when the valley was asleep, a faint murmuring could sometimes be heard, not singing, not speech, something in between. As though the sisters were praying in a language no one below could understand, the villagers told themselves it was nothing. The wind, perhaps the trees, echo of animals moving through the dark. But as the snow deepened each year, the murmuring grew louder. There was one man, a miller, who lived closest to the hill. His home was a half-mile down the slope, along the frozen river. He said the sounds would wake him, not like voices at first, more like a vibration in the walls. And when he rose from bed and looked out through his window, he swore he saw the belfry lantern flicker on. Even when no mass was scheduled, he stopped speaking of it. Eventually, but he started locking his doors more carefully, and he kept a rosary by his bed. The convent itself, by all accounts, was unremarkable inside: stone floors, narrow corridors, a refectory with a long wooden table, polished smooth from years of use. The chapel at its center was plain: a single altar, a crucifix carved by hand, and pews enough for the sisters alone. They had little contact with the outside world. Groceries were ordered by letter, firewood delivered by sled. They paid in cash, always exact, always on time. But some villagers noticed something odd about those deliveries. Women who came to the gate never opened it fully. They would accept the crates through a small turnstile, like a toll window. The same crate would be returned days later, the contents emptied, but always cleaned, as if scrubbed by hand. And there was never laughter, never the warm, incidental chatter one might expect, even from women of faith. Only the same low murmuring, half heard, when the gate was closed and the wind was right in town. People whispered their own theories. Some said the sisters had taken a vow of perpetual prayer, speaking only to God, never to each other. Others claimed the order was penitent, that every night they performed rituals of atonement for sins no one would name. And some, quietly, wondered if the convent was truly empty at all, and that what they heard on the wind were not voices of the living, but the bells were the clearest. Sign that something about the hill was different. On Sundays, the ringing was gentle, deliberate, 3 times at dawn, 3 times at noon, 3 times at dusk. Always the same, always steady, yet there were nights when the bells would toll unexpectedly. not with the measured rhythm of prayer, but in long, uneven peals like a warning or a summons. One farmer, traveling home late, heard the bells begin around midnight. He was still 2 miles from the hill, trudging through snowdrifts. When the sound started, the first toll froze him in. Placed by the third, he said, it felt like the sound was coming from beneath his feet, as if the earth itself carried the vibration. He never spoke to the sisters. He didn't even look toward the hill as he passed, but he told his neighbors that when the bells stopped, the night became too quiet. No wind, no snow falling, not even the creak of the trees. And in that silence, he thought he heard someone breathing just behind him. He never traveled that road again. Still, life in the valley continued, as it always had. People whispered, yes, but few truly feared the convent. It had stood for decades. The sisters had done no harm, and so long as the bells only tolled on Sundays, it was easy to believe the rest was nothing more than stories. But something had begun to change by the start of the new year. The snowfall was heavier than any the villagers could recall. The roads were impassable for days at a time. The sky hung low and gray, as though pressing down on the hills, and at night, the murmuring from the hilltop no longer faded into the wind. It drifted across the valley, seeping through shutters, curling under doors. Parents began waking to find their children sitting up in bed, staring toward the convent in the distance. Some said their children would whisper the same phrase over and over, 3 words, in a language none of them recognized. And on the coldest nights, the bells began tolling again, not for prayer, not for mass, but for something else entirely. One evening, the miller swore he saw lights moving along the roofline, not lanterns, but something dimmer. He counted them 37, each light swaying in perfect rhythm, as though held by invisible hands. He told no one for days. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled, and all he would say was this: they weren't alone up there. By the time the snow reached the eaves of the village homes, people had stopped speaking of the convent altogether, not out of fear, precisely, but something deeper, a sense that to even name the sisters aloud was to invite their attention. The hills stood silent by day, still, cold, and waiting. But when the sun went down and the valley sank into shadow, everyone knew the same unspoken rule. Did not look toward the convent. You did not listen for the bells. And if you woke to hear voices carried on the wind, you prayed they were only the wind, because in the heart of that winter, beneath the endless snow, something had begun to stir on the hill of silent bells, and the villagers could feel it, though none of them could yet name it. They all knew the same thing. The sisters were not praying for salvation anymore. They were preparing for something else, something the valley had not seen before, and something it would not survive. The camera drifts low across a valley buried in white snow drapes, the trees like shrouds. The sky is heavy, colorless, sagging low enough to erase the horizon. At the far end of the valley, the convent sits still. Its dark stone walls rise from the drift, half buried, its roof lines etched sharp against the blank sky. The belfry, narrow and spired, is crusted with ice. The bells have not rung in days. It is January 1952. The snowfall has not stopped. The hilltop road is impassable now, swallowed by waist-deep banks. Only the villagers who live nearest dare bring supplies. They come by sled, pulled by tired horses, cutting tracks through the snow that vanish by morning. They never cross the gate. They never speak the sisters' names aloud. Each delivery is the same: a small wooden crate filled with bread, tinned vegetables, salted fish left just outside the convent gate, beneath a weathered wooden crucifix that tilts slightly in the wind. The gate opens only a crack. A single hand, gloved in black wool, reaches through, takes the crate, pulls it inside without a word. The villagers wait, just long enough to see the gate close again, and then they turn their sleds back down the hill. No one lingers. No one ever does. At first, these journeys feel like duty, a necessary kindness, nothing more. But as the snow deepens and the sky grows darker, the trips begin to feel different. Each visit to the hills stretches longer. Though no words are exchanged, the wind seems to die when they approach the gate. The air feels thinner, colder, as though the hill itself resents their presence. And then there are the sounds. The first to hear, it is a man named Grieger, a farmer, broad-shouldered, with a scar along his jaw. He brings a crate of wood and candles. One evening, just before dusk, the air is brittle dry, the kind of cold that sears the lungs. As he kneels to set the crate down, he pauses through the thick wooden doors. He hears a voice low steady, not words, not exactly a rhythm, as if someone is reciting a prayer, not meant for the living to hear. He stands frozen, his breath fogging in the still air. The voice is joined by another and another, until it is not one voice, but many, blending into a single, droning Corinth 37 voices, rising and falling as one he backs away from the gate. The sound does not falter, if anything. It grows louder, filling the air like a vibration, crawling beneath his coat, into his bones. The gate creaks a gloved hand reaches out, takes the crate, pulls it through. The voices never stop. Grieger does not wait for the gate to close. He turns and leaves without looking back. By the next day, the story has reached the others, but no one repeats the words aloud. For long each telling feels dangerous, as though naming what he heard might bring the voices closer. And so, the villagers keep delivering their crates. Each week, the snow grows higher. Each week, the air grows quieter, and each week, the murmuring behind the doors grows louder. Some try to explain it. Perhaps it is a vow of prayer, they say, the sisters, trapped by the storm, speaking to God without pause, asking for the snow to break. But even those who believe this avoid the gate after dusk, because there is something about those voices, the way they move in perfect unison, without breath, without falter, it feels less like prayer and more like practice. One evening, a boy named Lúcia rides up the hill with his uncle. He is only 12. It is his first delivery. He holds the reins, his breath clouding as the horse pulls them up the final stretch. They stop at the gate. The uncle lowers the crate. The boy stares at the wooden doors, their hinges crusted with frost, the iron lock dark with rust. And that is when he sees a sliver of movement in the gap where the two doors meet. Not a face, not even an eye, just a glimpse of fabric, a veil, black as the night sky, swaying gently as if someone is standing inches away, waiting. The boy looks at his uncle, but the man does not meet his gaze. He keeps his head down, his hands folded, as if in prayer. The gate opens just enough for a gloved hand. The crate disappears. The gate shuts, and in the silence that follows, Lúcia swears he hears something from beyond the wall. Not voices, not chanting, but the faint, brittle ring of a bell. So small, so high, it sounds almost like it is coming from underground. He does not tell his uncle. He does not speak at all for the rest of the ride down. But that night, when he lies awake in bed, he cannot stop hearing it, the faint trembling, chime over and over, until he no longer knows if it is memory, or if the sound is still there, floating through the valley, seeping through the cracks in his window. By the third week of snow, the convent has become a shadow, its walls buried nearly to the windowsills, its chimneys coughing thin plumes of smoke. Into the gray sky, no one sees the sisters, no one hears them speak, only the constant murmuring, spilling faintly into the air. When the wind is still, the villagers start making their deliveries in pairs, not for safety, exactly, but because none of them wish to be alone near the gate anymore. One man claims that when he turned his sled to leave, he felt something in the snow behind him, a shift like weight pressing down, just beyond sight. When he looked back, there were no tracks, only the same unbroken white. Another swears he saw shadows move across the upper windows, though no lights. Earned inside, the shapes were slow, deliberate, not the movement of nuns at work, but something pacing, circling, as if mapping the interior walls in silence. They tell no one outside the valley. There is no reason to. The sisters are not dangerous, not yet, and the storm is reason enough to explain away the unease. But every night, when the villagers bar their doors, they hear it, the murmuring, sometimes low, like a single breath repeated endlessly, sometimes loud, rising into a wavering hum, carrying across the frozen fields like a warning. The sound has a weight to it now, a pulse, like a distant thrum, of a drum buried beneath the snow, and with each passing night, it becomes harder for those below to sleep. The sound is not constant, it comes and goes, but when it fades, the silence it leaves behind feels worse, heavy, expectant, as though the hill itself is listening. By the end of January, the snow reaches the convent's lower roof line. The villagers have stopped speaking to each other about the voices. They deliver the crates, they avert their eyes, and they leave as quickly as they came, but inside their homes. With the windows shuttered tight and the fires burning low, they begin to notice something else: their clocks at night. When the murmuring is loudest, the clocks seem to stutter, not stop, just lag, as if the hands dragged through invisible resistance. Seconds stretching longer than they should, minutes dragging into hours, and always, just before the sound fades, they hear it, the faint, high chime of a bell, one note sharp cold, and then silence. It happens often enough that the villagers stop questioning it. It is easier to pretend it is nothing, that the storm is simply too strong, that their clocks are worn, their ears deceived. But in the pit of their stomachs, they know the truth. The sisters on the hill are still praying, hour after hour, day after day, and whatever it is they are praying for, it is not for the snow to stop, it is for something to arrive. And when it does, the valley will not be ready. The camera pushes slowly through a wall of white. The snow falls heavy, thick as ash, swallowing the hills and muffling every sound but the creak of trees and the slow hiss of wind. The valley is a shadow, dim, with only the faint outline of the convent cutting through the blizzard at the top of the hill. The belfry looms. Its narrow spire is black against the moonlight. The cross, at its peak, leans slightly, iced over, the iron flaking. The ropes that hang within sway gently. Though the air is still, it is midnight, and the bells begin to toll. The sound is soft at first, a low, deliberate chime, carried down the slope like a pulse, one note every few seconds, measured, almost careful. The villagers hear it in their beds. Some wake, some pretend to stay asleep, staring at their ceilings, counting each strike in the dark. The bells do not stop, not after 3 chimes, not after 9, not even when the hour passes. They keep ringing slow, uneven, not in the pattern of mass, not in any rhythm anyone recognizes. By the second hour, people begin to feel it in their walls. The vibrations thread through beams and windows, rattling loose panes of glass. The sound doesn't fade with distance. It spreads, curling low along the frozen ground, seeping into every home. But something wasn't right. There is no wind, no storm to carry the sound. The air outside is so still that the smoke from chimneys rises in perfectly straight columns, unmoving, as though the valley itself is holding its breath. And still, the bells toll. One boy, no older than 13, wakes to the sound. He is used to hearing the sisters' Sunday calls, soft and even, distant. But this is different. There is a weight to each toll, like a hand pressing against his chest. He rises from bed, careful not to wake his brothers. The house is dark. His parents are asleep behind a closed door. He moves to the window. The glass is cold enough to burn his fingertips. He leans close, squinting through the frost that has formed across the panes, through the haze. The hill is barely visible, a pale slope against a darker sky, and that's when he sees it at the top of the convent. The belfry lantern flickers on the yellow light, cuts through the snow, faint but steady, encircling the lantern. Along the narrow wooden ledge are shadows, not figures, not clearly, just the suggestion of movement, something pacing around the tower, one after another, in a perfect, unbroken loop. The boy stares, breath fogging against the glass. The ropes beneath the bells are still. There is no sway, no pull, no sign of hands at work, but the bells keep ringing. Each toll is slightly off, like metal struck by something not quite solid, not loud, not booming, but hollow, and deep enough that he feels it in his ribs. He tries to wake his brothers, shakes their shoulders, whispers their names, but they do not stir. Their breathing is deep, rhythmic, almost unnatural, as if they are bound to some other cadence. Not his, not the room's, but something outside. Sinking them to the bells, he lets them be and returns to the window. The shadows keep circling the belfry, never breaking formation, never speeding or slowing, though the snow whirls around them in gusts that somehow do not touch the tower below. On the slope leading up, he notices something else, dark streaks in the snow, not tracks, not exactly, more like lines, as if something heavy was dragged up the hill and then erased by wind that isn't blowing. The bells grow louder, not in volume, but in presence, as if the sound is no longer moving through the air, but rising from inside his own chest. He backs away from the glass, stumbles once, catching himself against the wooden frame of his bed. But the moment he does, the bells stop. The valley falls silent, no wind, no creaking trees, even the sound of the river, usually a dull hum beneath the ice, is gone. And then a single chime, not from the belfry, not from the hill, but from somewhere closer, somewhere inside the house. The boy freezes, holds his breath, listens. No one moves in the rooms below. No doors creak, only that one sound, faint but sharp, echoing through the beams. And then nothing the next morning. The hill is the same as always. The convent stands silent. The belfry is dark. There are no footprints, no streaks in the snow, nothing to prove the bells ever rang out. In the village, no one speaks of it openly. Not the boy, not the families who woke to the sound, because they all know the same thing. Though none dare put it into words, the bells did not toll for Mass. They were not calling the sisters to prayer. They were counting something, and whatever they were counting had not yet finished that night. The valley goes still again. No snow, no wind. And then, just past midnight, the first bell tolls once more. The camera moves slowly through a wall of drifting snow. The trees rise dark and skeletal on either side, their branches bowing beneath the weight of ice. The sound of wind is faint, almost muffled, as though the world itself is holding its breath. A figure moves along the frozen path. A man, his black coat is stiff with frost, his boots sinking into the crust of snow that cracks beneath each step. In one hand, he carries a leather satchel. In the other, a lantern, its weak glow swallowed by the white. He is a priest. His name is Father Ansel, and by his own account, he should not have been there 2 weeks earlier. He had been traveling between parishes to the south. A letter reached him, unsigned, bearing only the seal of a diocese he did not recognize. It requested his presence at the convent on the hill. No reason given, no signature, beyond a single initial. May did not know the sisters. He had never even heard of their order, but he was a man of habit and of duty, and so he came. When he arrived, the valley was silent. The snow had fallen without pause for days. The road was nearly gone, reduced to a faint groove winding upward toward the convent. He described the place in his journal, a tall wall of stone, buried nearly to its gates. No sound within, no lanterns lit, save for a single glow in the belfry, faint as a star seen through cloudy, knocked 3 times. The echo carried strangely, swallowed by the snow before it could fade. After a long pause, the gate opened just enough for a figure to appear, a sister tall, wrapped in layers of black wool, her face obscured beneath a heavy veil. She did not greet him. She only nodded and motioned for him to follow inside. The air was colder than he expected. The corridors narrow, the stone walls slick with moisture where the frost had begun to bleed through. No candles burned along the passageways. Only the faintest light spilled from beneath the chapel doors ahead, wrote that the convent did not feel empty. It felt waiting. Every sound, his boots on the flagstones, the creak of the wooden door frames, seemed to echo too long, as if the air itself resisted silence. And then he heard out a whisper, not one voice, many threaded together into a low, rasping current seeping beneath the chapel doors. When the sister pushed them open, he saw them all, 37 of the women, kneeling in rows, heads bowed, lips moving in unison. Their faces were pale, drawn tight, their mouths cracked from cold and hunger. He would later learn they had not eaten in 4 days. Each voice was hoarse, every word scraped, broken, as if they had been speaking for hours, perhaps longer. The rhythm of their prayer was slow, deliberate, and entirely without melody. It was not Latin, not a tongue he recognized, and yet he felt he had heard it before. He asked the sister who had led him in what they were saying. She did not answer. She only raised her gloved hand to her lips, as if to tell him to stay silent, and guided him to the far end of the room. Beneath the altar, he saw something else here, a small stack of candles, each burned down to its base, and a single scrap of parchment, held in place by a stone on it. Drawn in uneven, almost frantic strokes, was the outline of the forest beyond the convent. Walls unmarked among the trees. A figure tall, narrow shape, sketched in black ink, faceless, but with a hand extended toward the convent. At its fingertips, small lines like threads reached outward, looping toward the outline of the chapel Father Anselm. Did not ask about it. He would not admit it, but he felt his throat tighten when he saw it, as though the air in the chapel had thickened, heavy and cold that night. They offered him a room. The corridor was silent as he lay down, but he could hear the sisters beyond. The walls, their voices never stopped low dry, like wind scraping through a hollow space. Tried to sleep, but every time his eyes closed, he saw the figure on the parchment, its hand stretched toward the convent. The looping lines, faintly curved, almost like ropes or threads, pulling inward. He woke once, near midnight, to the sound of footsteps in the hall, slow, measured, not hurried, but deliberate, as if someone was pacing the length of the corridor outside his door. When he listened closer, he realized the sound was not footsteps. It was breathing, not ragged, not near, but deep and steady, as though whatever made it stood far off, yet somehow filled the entire space between the walls. He did not open his door. He only waited, gripping the wooden rosary in his hand, until the sound faded. The next morning, he met with the abbess. Her face was hidden by the same heavy veil as the others. She did not sit, only stood near the frost-lined window. Her voice little more than a rasp. She told him why they had called for him. For weeks, she said, the sisters had seen something beyond the tree line, not moving openly, not approaching, only standing there, between the trees, visible only when the snow broke just long enough for the sky to pale. They had tried to ignore it, but each day it appeared closer, not by steps, not by tracks, simply nearer, as though the woods themselves had folded to bring it closer to their walls. She said they had begun fasting, praying without cease, their voices unbroken by rest, in hopes that whatever it was would pass them by. Father Anselm asked what they thought it wanted. The abbess did not answer. She only turned her head toward the window, her veil trembling slightly. As she breathed, he wrote in his journal. There was something in her silence, not fear, not defiance, something colder, as though she had already seen what awaited us and had resigned herself to it. He stayed 2 more nights. Each evening, the prayers grew softer, not weaker, but thinner, as if the sisters' voices were fraying, threads unraveling one by one on. The 3rd night, just before dawn, he heard the bells not ringing for Mass, not even from the belfry. The sound was distant, low, like metal dragged slowly over stone. When he looked from his window, the forest at the base of the hill seemed darker than before, not from shadow, but from something standing where no trees had grown. He wrote his final words just after sunrise. The sisters have stopped asking for deliverance. Their prayers have become something else, not to God, not for salvation, but for time, as though they know they cannot stop what is coming, only slow it. The journal was later found buried in the snow beside the convent wall, its leather cover stiff with frost, its last page torn, the ink smeared by something more than melted ice. And Father Anselm was never seen again. But on the hill, in the nights that followed, the villagers swore they could hear it, not the sisters, not their rasped voices, a deeper breath, moving through the trees, closer and closer until, one evening, the bells began to toll again, but not from the tower, from somewhere beneath the ground, and the hill began to tremble. The camera drifts over the valley in darkness. The snow has stopped, but the air is sharp, brittle, cold enough to burn the lungs. The sky is heavy with cloud, the moonlight thin and colorless, barely enough to illuminate the slope that leads to the convent. The hill is silent, the gates are shut, no smoke rises from the chimneys. It is the night of January 16th, a night no one was supposed to remember. A farmer named Dorian is walking home along the lower road. His cart creaks behind him, the wheels groaning against the hard-packed snow. The horses move slow, their breaths rising in thick plumes that hang in the air like ghosts. He has walked this road 100 times. He knows every tree, every curve, every shadow. But tonight, the air feels wrong. The stillness is too deep. Even the usual creak of the forest has vanished, as if the trees themselves are listening for something. And then he hears it at first. It is only a hum low distant, a faint vibration carried through the air, more felt than heard. He stops walking. The horses freeze, their ears twitching, their heads turning toward the hill. The sound grows clearer, not wind, not the shifting of branches. Voices, many voices. He counts without meaning to the tones overlap, layering into a single, heavy current. Not 36, not 38, 37 old chanting, not in Latin, not in any tongue he recognizes. Each word falls heavy, drawn out, as though the speakers are pulling the sounds from deep within their chests. It rises and falls like a tide, sometimes soft, almost a whisper, sometimes rising to a hollow, unsteady swell that makes the air feel heavier, denser, as though the valley itself is being pulled toward the hill. Dorian grips the reins. The horses shift, restless, their hooves scraping against the ice. He thinks, for a moment, of turning back, of taking the longer route along the river. But then, cutting through the chant, he hears a single chime knot from the belfry, not high and clean, but low and muted, as if a bell had been struck somewhere deep inside the earth. The vibration runs through the ground, into the wood of his cart, into his bones. The chanting does not stop. It grows louder, steadier, as though the sound of the bell has anchored it. Each voice is raw, rasping, stretched thin from exhaustion. But none falter, none break. Dorian steps forward, just enough to see through the gap in the trees. The convent is lit, not from the windows, which remain dark, but from within the chapel itself. A faint orange glow seeps through the cracks in the shutters, flickering in time with the voices. He watches for a moment, breath shallow, ears straining. The sound is not just a hymn. There is no melody, no repetition. Each line feels different, uneven, as though the words are not meant to be remembered, only spoken. And then the air shifts. The horses rear suddenly, their breaths tearing out in sharp bursts of steam. The reins slip from his hands. The cart lurches back along the road as the animals panic, pulling away from the hill. But something wasn't right. The wind has not risen. The forest is still, yet the air feels charged, heavy, as if the sky itself is pressing down on the valley. The chanting swells to a breaking point, not louder, but deeper. The vibrations running through the snow. They trees into his chest, making his heart stutter. He stumbles back toward his cart, fumbling for the reins, his fingers numb and clumsy. The voices rise once more, one final swell, before cutting off completely. The valley falls silent, utterly. No wind, no forest, not even the sound of his own breath, though his chest heaves with every inhale. And then, faintly, from somewhere within the convent walls, he hears Ida's single voice, hoarse, barely more than a whisper, speaking a word he does not know, a word that feels heavier than the air around it. The lantern light inside the chapel flickers and goes dark. The horses bolt, tearing the cart down the slope, their hooves striking sparks on the frozen ground. Dorian does not look back, not even once. When he returns to the village, his lips are blue, his hands stiff from the cold. He does not tell the others what he heard, not the words, not the sound of the bell, Not the single voice that lingered after the others. He only tells them this, that whatever the sisters had gathered for, it was not. Mass, and when the villagers rise the next morning, the hill is silent again. No smoke, no movement. The gates still shut, but in the snow outside the convent walls. 37 sets of footprints lead from the gate toward the chapel door, and none lead back out. The camera drifts over the valley at first light. The sky is pale, almost colorless, with the sun rising behind a wall of cloud so thin it feels like paper. The snow stretches unbroken across the fields, smooth as glass. Except for one slope, the hill where the convent once stood, it is gone. The building, the belfry, the chapel, even the wall of stone that enclosed it only, the ground remains. Uneven and raw, the snow around it churned and scattered, as if something massive had been torn out of the earth and carried away. There is no smoke, no movement, no sign of collapse or fire, just absence at the edge of the hollow. The villagers gather. Some whisper prayers. Some simply stand in silence, watching the way the wind moves across the empty ground, lifting thin veils of snow into the air. But something wasn't right. The earth beneath the snow feels soft, too soft, as though the frost has been broken from below, the ground disturbed not by shovels, but by something heavier, shifting upward, and then sinking again, and then they see the footprints, dozens of them, pressed deep into the snow, crisp and sharp despite. The wind 37 pairs, all bare. The prints lead away from the hollow, weaving down the hill toward the frozen river. They are not hurried, not scattered. Each step is measured, evenly spaced, as though the sisters walked in perfect silence and perfect unison, side by side. The villagers follow. No one speaks above a whisper. The only sound is the crunch of boots against snow and the faint groan of the river. Ice ahead, the trail winds along the slope for nearly a mile, through a stretch of bare trees. Every so often, the prints cross paths with tracks of animals, deer, foxes, but those trails stop abruptly near the sisters' path. The prints end. The animal tracks do not continue it. That's when one of the men hears Ida faint, low sound beneath their feet. Not the creak of the river ice, not the shifting of snow. Something deeper, resonant, as though the earth itself is humming. The others hear it too. It lasts only a moment, just long enough for the air to feel heavier, as though it has thickened around their throats. Then it stops. The trail reaches the river. The surface is frozen solid, a pale sheet of white stretching from bank to bank. The footprints continue across it, unbroken, leading in a perfect line toward. As center, the villagers step carefully onto the ice, the cold biting through their boots. The prints ahead are as clear as those in the snow, pressed so deep it seems the ice itself had softened beneath each step halfway across. The wind dies even. The trees along the shore fall still, their branches no longer swaying. The world feels muffled, soundless. Like the space between breaths at the center of the river, the prints stop abruptly. There is no break, no scattered pattern as though they turned back or split apart. No sign of struggle or fall. The trail simply ends, each print as distinct as the last, the final impressions pressed deep into the frost. And beyond that point, nothing, only untouched ice stretching to the far bank. The men circle the spot, scanning for cracks, for holes, for any sign the sisters had fallen through. But the ice is solid, clear beneath the top layer of frost, thick enough to hold a cart and horses. There is no blood, no fabric, no evidence at all that anyone had gone further or turned back. The sisters simply ceased to be. One of the villagers kneels beside the final footprints, runs his glove across the impression. The ice beneath feels strange, not slick, not smooth, but warm. He jerks his hand back. The others stare, and in the silence, they hear it again, the low hum, not from the ice, not from the wind, but from somewhere deep beneath them, steady and rhythmic, as if coming from far below the frozen riverbed. For a moment, no one moves. They stand in a circle around the last footprints, breath clouding the still air, eyes fixed on the frost that now seems to shift slightly, almost imperceptibly. beneath their boots, and then the sound stops. The ice falls silent. The trees along the banks sway again as the wind returns. Whistling low over the frozen surface, the villagers leave slowly. Without speaking, their tracks join the sisters for a time before splitting away, back toward the village, leaving the final impressions untouched at the center of the river by nightfall. Snow begins to fall again, soft at first and heavier, until the wind sweeps it across the ice, covering every trace of the trail by morning. There is nothing left, no prints, no hollow where the convent once stood, no sign that 37 sisters had ever walked across the valley, or that the hill had ever held walls. A chapel and a belfry only. The frozen river remains silent, undisturbed, but beneath the surface, the hum begins again, faint, steady, as if something far below is counting, waiting and drawing closer. The camera moves slowly across the valley, over fields of hard snow where the wind scrapes against the frozen earth. The hill rises ahead, empty now, its surface uneven, ridged as if something massive had been pulled away from beneath it. The faint tracks of men and horses cross the slope, weaving up toward the hollow where the convent once stood in early February. The church arrives not with bells, nor with ceremony. 3 black carriages, 7 men in heavy wool cloaks, collars drawn tight against the cold. They speak little as they move, their boots crunching through the snow in unison. At the base of the hill, they meet the villagers who had found the place empty. There are no greetings, no questions, only orders, quiet and firm. The hill is to be sealed. No one is to climb it without their leave. The men make the ascent alone, one by one. They cross into the hollow. They do not linger at its center, where the ground dips, where the frost seems softer, almost damp. They keep their eyes down, their faces hidden beneath their hoods, as though to avoid seeing what is not there. But something wasn't right, even without the walls, without the chapel, without the belfry. There is a weight to the air, not cold, not heavy with snow, but dense, as if each breath must be forced through something unseen. The wind that scours the slope stills the moment they step into the hollow. Every sound seems to dull. Even the faint creak of the trees beyond is muted. One of the men, a younger priest, his boots new, his face pale beneath his hood, pauses near the edge of the clearing. He kneels, brushes the snow aside. Beneath there is no stone foundation, no splintered beams, no shards of glass, only bare soil, frozen and dark, pressed flat as if nothing had ever been built there at all. He does not speak. He only rises slowly and follows the others, who begin their work without a word. They move through the valley, not to question, but to collect journals, loose pages found near the wall, the torn fragments of the sisters' records, some stiff with frost, others soaked through as though pulled from water. The hymnals, stacked inside the chapel's ruins when it had still stood, are gathered next, their bindings cracked, their pages warped. None of the men read from them, not aloud, not even in passing. They burn them at the foot of the hill. No words are spoken over. The flames, the smoke rises black, rising straight into the still sky, without wind to bend it. Even when the fire dies, the air seems thicker, as though the smoke has not dispersed, but sunk lower, hanging over the slope like a film. And that's when he heard it. The younger priest, standing apart from the others, feels it before he can name it. Not a sound, not fully a faint hum beneath his boots, threading through the frozen soil. It lasts only a moment, no louder than a heartbeat. Before fading again, he does not mention it, not to the others, not in his notes. But his hands shake as he traces the sign of the cross, the leather of his gloves creaking as he grips them tight by evening. Their work is done. The journals, the fragments, the hymnals, all but a few sealed pages, are burned. The ashes are shoveled into iron bins and carried down the slope, to be scattered along the river at the diocese's instruction. An official report is drafted that same night. It states, without detail, that the convent was lost to a structural collapse. The foundation had weakened beneath the snow. The walls buckled, and the sisters, unwilling to abandon their chapel, were claimed by the ruins. No mention of the missing. Debris. No mention of the missing bodies in the report's margins. However, a faint stain appears dark, almost circular, like water or wax, or something pressed into the parchment. While it was still wet, the villagers never see the report. They only hear the explanation secondhand, relayed by a deacon 2 weeks later. None of them believe it, but none speak against it. Either they know. What they saw, the empty hill, the footprints leading to the frozen river, vanishing at its center, the way the snow had seemed to hum beneath their feet, the clergy leave before dawn, their carriages creaking down the slope in silence. No marker is left behind, no cross, no plaque, no sign that the hill had ever held a convent, or that 37 women had once prayed within its walls. By midday, snow begins to fall again, soft at first, then heavier, filling the hollow, covering the last traces of the investigation by nightfall. The hill is indistinguishable from any other rise in the valley, but beneath the snow, where the ground dips, deepest, the hum returns faint, steady, a rhythm, not unlike a bell, pulsing low in the earth. A younger priest, days later, writes one final note in his personal journal, a note not included in the official report. It is not the collapse we fear. He writes, it is what remained when nothing else did. The hollow was not empty. It was listening. He never signs his name, only marks the page with a single letter. Manned in the months that follow, the villagers swear they can still hear it on still. Nights, when the wind stops and the sky feels too heavy to breathe beneath. A faint tolling of a bell, not from the belfry, not from the chapel, but from somewhere deep under the frozen ground, counting, always counting, and never reaching the end. The camera moves slowly through a village road, narrow and sunken, where the thaw has turned the snow to wet slush. Spring has come, but the air still carries the bite of winter, sharp and metallic. The roofs drip, the gutters overflow, and the streets echo faintly with the steady sound of melting ice sliding from the eaves. Is late afternoon when the first villager sees her, at the far end of the road, moving slowly, carefully, as though the ground itself might swallow her if she steps too heavily. She is barefoot, her skin raw, bruised, each toe darkened from frostbite that had not yet healed. Her habit is torn, the black fabric stiff with mud and ice, clinging to her frame in ragged folds, and in her right hand she carries something small, something that catches the dim light, a silver bell. She does not speak, she does not look up, her head stays bowed, her movements deliberate, like a penitent in a procession, though no prayer escapes her lips, and that's when the woman closest to her sees it. The stitch is crude, uneven black thread pulling her lips shut in a jagged line, the skin around it red and swollen, crusted where the wounds have only just begun to seal. Each step she takes draws the faint sound of the bell, not from it ringing, for it does, not sway, but from the metal itself, as though it hums faintly when her feet press against the earth. The villagers gather slowly, circling at a distance. No one dares approach at first. The sight is too strange, too silent. The only sounds are the distant tripping of the thaw and the faint hum of the bell, which no one can quite place, for it does not ring, yet they all hear it. But something wasn't right. Her eyes remain open, fixed on nothing, unfocused, as though she is awake, but not entirely present. Her lips tremble against the thread, not in an attempt to speak, but with a faint rhythmic twitch, in time with the hum of the bell. It is not until dusk that a priest from the parish comes older stern. He kneels before her, speaking softly, asking her name, her order, her purpose. No sound emerges. She does not even blink. He reaches out carefully, his fingers brushing against the silver bell in her hand. The moment his skin touches it, the hum stops. The air feels suddenly heavier, as if the space around them has grown smaller, tighter, and then he hears it, not the bell, not her voice, but something beneath his feet, a faint vibration, deep in the soil, pulsing at a measured pace. He withdraws his hand. The bell hums again. The pressure in the air lifts. The woman is taken into the parish hall, where they light no candles that night, only oil lamps, their flames low and unsteady. Her feet are wrapped, her wounds cleaned, the stitches remain, the priest deciding not to cut them until she is calm. But she never rests even as she lies on the cot, her body rigid. Her hand never releases the bell. She does not close her eyes. Her breath is shallow, and the faint hum, barely perceptible, continues, rising from the metal in her hand in rhythm with her pulse by morning. The priest makes the decision to cut the stitches. The thread is stiff, brittle, as though it has been in place far longer than the wounds suggest. Each snip of the scissors seems to echo in the still room, though no one speaks. When the last thread is cut, her lips part slightly, dry and crack no words. Only a breath, slow shuddering, and then, faintly, a sound emerges, not from her throat, not even from her lips, but from the bell in her hand, single chimed soft hollow, as if it were struck from within. The priest staggers back, the scissors clattering against the floorboards. The sound fades as quickly as it came. The woman does not move her eyes for the first time, shifts slightly, turning toward the door that night. She finally sleeps, the first time since she was found, her breath steady, her grip on the bell loosened. But the parish hall does not remain still. In the deepest hours before dawn, when the lamps have all burned low and the last embers in the hearth have gone dark, the hum begins again, not from the bell this time, from beneath the floor. The priest, awake in his cot on the far side of the room, hears it first, a faint vibration, deep, rhythmic, as though something vast stirs far below the earth. He rises, bare feet against the cold wood, the hum traveling through his bones with each step. He stops beside her cot. She is awake, her eyes open, her lips parted now, raw from the removal of the stitches. But no sound escapes her, only the faintest trace of movement, a whisper of breath forming, shapes without voice, as though reciting words long buried. The bell, though untouched, begins to vibrate faintly against the cot, not ringing, just shaking, in time with the pulse beneath the floor. The priest bends closer, straining to hear what she is mouthing. The shapes are strange, the rhythm uneven, but they are deliberate words, not Latin, not anything he knows. And then the floor beneath them shifts, not much, just enough for the oil lamp on the far table to rattle. Hum deepens. The woman's lips stop moving, her eyes lock onto his, and for the first time, she speaks a single word, cracked and raw, her voice like something unused for years. The oil lamp goes out, the hum stops, and in the silence that follows, the priest feels it not in his ears, not even beneath his feet, but in his chest, as though something deep below has marked the moment, and will not forget it when the parish wakes the next morning. The nun is gone, her cot empty, no footprints in the thawing earth outside, only the silver bell, left on the wooden floor, perfectly still silent until the priest touches it again and feels the faint hum, pulsing, slow and deliberate, counting, always counting, and never stopping. The camera moves through a narrow study, lit only by a single oil lamp. The walls are lined with shelves sagging beneath the weight of leather-bound volumes. Their spines, cracked and faded dust hangs in the air, drifting slowly in the warm glow, each particle catching the light before sinking back into shadow. It is late March. The snow outside has begun to melt, but the cold lingers, seeping through the stone walls of the parish rectory. Inside, a priest sits hunched at his desk, shoulders stiff, hands trembling slightly as he turns a page. The journal before him is not his own. It is one of the few that had survived the church's purge of the convent's remains. Most were burned on the hill. This one was kept buried deep in the archives, forgotten. Until now, the handwriting is uneven, lines pressed hard into the paper as though written in haste. Some letters nearly torn through the page. Several passages are blotted, others struck through entirely. But there is one section, near the center, that has not been touched, a hymn phonetically transcribed. Its notes, if they are notes at all, marked not in any recognizable system, but in symbols, crescents and lines, repeating in deliberate, measured patterns. Beneath it, in smaller script, a warning not to be read aloud, not to be spoken, even in thought. The voice carries farther than the body. The priest traces the words with his finger, feels the groove of each letter. His hand lingers over the first line of the hymn, but something wasn't right. The air in the room feels heavier, not warmer, not colder, just thicker, as though it must be pushed aside with each breath. The lamp flickers, its flame bending without a draft. The priest leans back, closes the book, but the shapes of the words remain behind his eyes. Imprinted there, like an afterimage that night, he does not sleep, not fully each time his eyes close. The rhythm of the hymn stirs in the back of his mind, not as sound, not yet, but as movement, a pulse, slow, deliberate counting on the third night. He dreams the hill empty, as it has been since January, snow blowing across the hollow, and faintly, from nowhere and everywhere, the tolling of a single bell. He wakes before dawn, heart pounding the hymn, though he has not spoken it, echoes faintly in his chest like a remembered prayer, and that's when he hears it not. From the journal, not from outside, but from the parish steeple above, the bell ringing soft at first, a single chime followed by another, then a pattern measured unbroken. The sound rolls through the stone halls, vibrating faintly against the windows, low enough to rattle the panes, but the steeple is empty. The parish has no bell. It had been removed years ago, its frame left bare, the ropes frayed and cut. The priest rises, candle in hand, and ascends the stairs. Each step creaks underfoot, the sound nearly lost beneath the steady tolling that now grows louder, resonant, as though the walls themselves carry it at the top of the stairs. The air changes, still dense. The sound does not echo here as it does below. It is closer, more direct. The wooden trapdoor to the steeple is ajar. A faint draft flows down, colder than the night air, smelling faintly of iron and ash. The priest pauses. The candle in his hand trembles, its flame drawing long and thin. The tolling stops in the silence that follows. He hears something else, not a voice, not exactly a rhythm, breathless, like the sound of many feet moving in unison, far above, though there is nowhere for them to be. He closes the trapdoor, descends the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, his candle unsteady in his hand. The sound does not follow, but the rhythm lingers, faint, inside his chest. By morning, word spreads through the parish. The townspeople had heard it too, the tolling all through the night. From an empty steeple, some claimed it stopped only when the sun touched the horizon. The priest does not tell them about the hymn, or the warning, or the way the words still form unbidden in his thoughts, shaping themselves into something closer to a chant than a prayer. But that evening, as he sits at his desk once more, he finds himself turning the journal to that same page, tracing the lines of the symbols again, his fingers shaking as it moves. The room feels heavier once more. The lamp bends against no wind, and faintly, though no bell has yet sounded, he feels it begin in his chest. Again the pulse, slow, deliberate counting. He closes the journal, locks it in the drawer, extinguishes the lamp, but the pulse does not fade. And in the stillness of the rectory, as the first shadow of night creeps across the floor, he realizes it isn't coming from him. It's coming from the walls, the stones themselves, breathing, waiting, and somewhere far above, where the steeple stands empty, a single hollow chime rings again, soft, steady, unmistakable, and this time it does not stop. The camera moves slowly over a ridge of snow, pale under a winter moon. The wind pulls across the valley, whispering. Through the bare trees ahead, the hill rises, fenced and locked, its surface untouched by roads or paths. The hollow where the convent once stood is only a shallow depression now. Hidden beneath drifts of ice, it is early January. 73 years after the sisters vanished, the locals avoid the hill. Few even speak of it anymore. But every winter, when the snow settles deep and the nights grow long, the sound returns, faint, almost too soft to notice at first. A bell, not sharp or metallic, not the kind of bell that calls for service, but a low, hollow tone, carrying across the frozen valley like something breathed, not struck, always in pairs, always in intervals. Hikers who stray too close to the fence hear it most. Some only once, others for hours, as though the sound keeps pace with their movement, just far enough to remain out of sight. But something wasn't right on the coldest nights, when the sky is cloudless and the moonlight turns the snow to glass. The hill shows signs that it is not empty footprints, fresh dozens of Fan 37. Pairs they appear just past midnight, near the center of the hollow, moving in slow, deliberate circles, never straying far from where the chapel once stood. The prints are deep, as though made by heavy boots, but there are no other signs of life. No breath in the air, no shadow in the snowlight, no sound of movement to accompany the marks by dawn. They vanish, not filled by snow, not blown away by wind, simply gone, as though whatever made them had never stood there at all. One hiker, a man from the next village over, claims he saw more than just the prints. He had climbed the fence late one night, convinced the stories were nothing but local folklore. He stood at the edge of the hollow, waiting, watching the snow. The moon was high, the valley still, and the cold had begun to burn through his gloves. And that's when he heard the bell, not distant, as others had described, close below him, deep in the ground, as though the soil itself had swallowed the sound and was breathing it back up through. The frosty air thickened. His chest felt tight, as though each breath had to be dragged through something unseen. And then he felt it under his feet, a vibration, steady, slow, not random, a rhythm account. The footprints began to form before his eyes. Not all at once, one pair, then another, each indentation pressing slowly into the snow, heel first, then toe, as though an invisible weight had stepped down within minutes. 37 sets had appeared, all moving in unison, circling the hollow in perfect time. He tried to leave, but the fence, just yards away, felt farther than it should. His legs heavy, his breath shallow. Each step he took was met with another bell tone, low and distant, as though the hill itself were marking his retreat. When he finally crossed back over, the sound stopped. The air felt light again, but the footprints remained circling unbroken, as if waiting for something to complete the pattern. By morning, the prints had disappeared. Only his own, trailing from the fence and back, remained. Locals whisper about what the sisters were waiting for in those last nights, why they circled the chapel instead of fleeing the storm, why the bells, long since gone, still sound beneath the soil. Some believe it is tied to the hymn, the one found in the journals, the one marked not to be spoken aloud. They say the sisters had sung it in their final service, when the farmer heard voices speaking a language he could not place, and that whatever answered them has not left in certain nights, when the snow is deep and the moonlight turns the hill white as bone. Hikers claim they can hear it beneath the bells. Not a voice, not music, just the faint shape of words, moving through the frozen air, carried on the rhythm of the tolling, always the same number of notes, always the same measured pace. Counting, the fence still stands, warning signs nailed to its posts, rusting in the wind. But each winter, the marks return. 37 pairs circling, waiting. No one has yet stayed long enough to see what happens when the count reaches its end. And maybe that is why the bells still toll low, steady, unbroken, waiting for someone, anyone, to sing the hymn again and answer whatever has been counting all this time. Beneath the frozen earth, perhaps they sought heaven and found something older. Perhaps the hymn was never meant for human voices. And perhaps some prayers are not meant to be answered